Thanks everybody for coming. Ladies, gentlemen, guys, gals, non-binary pals. That joke goes over way better in San Francisco. But that one goes over well anywhere. Thank you so much for attending our annual session on Fusion and Workstation, where we like to open the kimono a little bit and show you guys what we've been working on, what we're thinking, where we want to go. And we really also like to hear from you guys. Like, we have the mic in the forum. We'll give you some time at the end of it to do some Q&A so that we can kind of go back and forth. And I like to understand what you guys are doing with our product, because one of the funny things about these products is people don't always use them in the way that we intended. So it's really interesting to hear how folks are kind of using these things in the real world. So we love that interaction. I'm accompanied here today by a new product manager, actually. So before I get too far in, Zongmin, why don't you just stand up, say hello? Zongmin is new to our product management group. He actually has been running the Fusion QA team for about 5 or 6 years. So the Workstation QA team. So the quality of code that you've seen in Workstation is largely responsible for this gentleman here and his team. So we're very excited to have him on board as our new PM. So let's give a hand for Zongmin Lee. Thank you. Zongmin's going to be coming up and doing a demo for us in a little bit on one of the new features that we've gotten in Workstation. But before that, I've always come up here the past 3 years as I've been owning this product. I've been with VMware since 2009. We're actually started in support, running the Fusion and Workstation support team where I came from Apple. And I've been working with my partner in crime, Bo Fu. Bo, earlier this year, actually moved on to another set of products. As a fantastic product manager, he's actually he's one of the guys behind a lot of our cloud initiatives right now. So he's taken the expertise and he's bringing it up to the cloud. But just the other day, he wasn't able to actually make this session because he's welcomed his second-born child into the world. So we're very happy. And when this gets recorded and later on, Bo, thank you so much for all the work that you've done. We're so very proud of Logan Fu here. So thanks so much for all the help you've done over the years. So let's get to it. You guys probably saw some of this at some point in your life, maybe on the shelf of fries way back in the day, but we've come a long way since 1999. It's been 17 years in the making. And in 2007, something strange happened. Apple decided to go on to x86, and we said, we got this. So then we invented Fusion. We came out, we brought our hypervisor from Windows, we brought it over to Mac, Windows and Linux, and we brought it over to Mac. 2015, Fusion 8, Workstation 12. 2016 was a bit of a catch-up year for us. There was some changes that happened. We wanted to make sure that folks get the value out of their product. And just by giving base level OS support, for us, it just wasn't right to go ahead and charge you the regular update fee for that. So we made last year's version free. So skipping things around, we've gone to version 10 this year. And I see some applause there. Thank you for that. We are very excited about this, both Fusion 10 and Workstation 14. Why the name jump? Well, obviously last year should have been 9 and 13. Okay, fine. 13's not an unlucky number. That's not a thing. We are actually adopting a hardware platform version 14. As we do with Workstation, pretty much every year the version coincides with the version of the hardware platform that it's got, which is actually one version ahead of where vSphere 6.5 is today. So you can always look at Workstation and kind of get an insight into where vSphere is going to go without actually painting it on the wall, so to speak. And with the Fusion, in the case of Fusion, it's Fusion's 10th anniversary. So 2007, 2017, here we are. So, Ring 0. Who here knows what Ring 0 means? A couple of folks. So Ring 0 is the base layer of our virtualization stack. It is the piece that the VM kernel, the monitor that we call it, actually communicates with the hardware itself. And back in the day, we had one team. All of VMware built this one product called VMware 1.0. 2.0, and then Workstation 3.0 came after that, and when we forked it in GSX and WSX and all that other cool stuff happened. Nowadays, it's a little more complicated. We have a large platform division that develops our hypervisor itself, all of our networking components. VMware Tools is an independent release schedule now as well, which is cool because if we fix something in Tools, you guys don't have to wait for Workstation and Fusion to update to get that new fix. The same thing with the virtual hardware platform, all the way up right to the console, the mouse and keyboard that you're interacting with, the MKS system there. And then we have dedicated product groups that build and port that and make it work with their environment. And that goes the same for vSphere. There's a dedicated team that builds it there, Horizon, and every other business unit within the company that leverages the platform. So here's a quick look at the team. We've got a very large team. That's our Palo Alto guys in the middle. Our support folks over in our Bangalore office. Some of them are actually here. These guys are really amazing. I say that because I train them myself. But besides that, They really are stellar. I've always delivered really good things. Very rarely do you hear customers like, I had a terrible experience, because they're really on top of it and they care. They put our customers first. And of course, our hosted UI team, largely driven out of our Beijing office. The actual interface itself gets driven and guided by the decisions that happen in our Palo Alto office. So myself and my other team here in Palo Alto, we interact with our team in Beijing, and they really go ahead and deliver what it is that we require, what we put on the roadmap. So let's look at this year. What do we got? We got Fusion 10, Fusion 10 Pro, Workstation 14 Player, Workstation 14 Pro. We put Player on there because Player is actually growing. It's strange. When you look at the numbers, Player is growing much faster than the other ones are. And the reason for that is because it's the same platform. It's the same hypervisor underneath. But what businesses are able to do, and that's really where we're seeing the growth, is they're able to deliver a corporate desktop on any device, any machine that someone brings into their office. They can give them that corporate image, and that corporate image is going to run in Player just fine and dandy, right? So it's been really nice to see that kind of grow. Who do we build these things for? I like to kind of go through this because we don't build things in a silo. We really try to think about how our users are going to use these products, thinking about how the different types of users use our products differently. It's one thing to run an operating system, but operating systems can do so much. So having these tailored for these users is really where we like to focus a lot of our innovation. So for IT professionals, these are folks that do data center design, data center testing. These are vSphere. This is you guys. This is you. I don't expect to have a ton of developers in the room, but we do cater to these guys as well. So developers are folks who are building on multiple operating systems, building on DevOps, building with containers. They like to have an automated workflow instead of just I build some code, I push a button, and then look, there it is on the page. It's more about I've checked in my code into Git, and then Git does a whole bunch of other things to send it over to Jenkins. Jenkins does this other thing to this other tool, and it's this amazing pipeline that users have nowadays. We're cool? We're cool, no fire? All right. That'd be the worst fire alarm in the middle of a session. Goodness. So, and I did mention our business users. So these are largely Player, or in the case of Fusion, Fusion Pro. So you can bring your Mac, bring your PC to the workplace. You guys, as the IT professionals, can build the corporate image using Workstation Pro, give them it on a USB stick, or through Horizon Flex, just give them a license key. And they go ahead and actually can connect to our Horizon Flex service, download that VM, run it, and get rocking with whatever your corporate image happens to be. And this year, we've got some pretty new innovations around what we can do with those corporate images. So I mentioned about a common platform, right? When we look at Player, Player is really about that streamlined interface. It's the same underpinning that Workstation Pro has. We just got rid of all the stuff that your day-to-day, I don't know anything about a VM, I just know the tools that I need. Those type of users, we kind of get all the complexity out of the way. But we still need to be able to manage these things. So this is where our Horizon Flex comes into play. And some of the cool things that we've done with Guest OS support this year is going to be pretty interesting. So what do I mean by that? Well, this year we've got Windows 10 update, the 6 months release cycle. It's getting a little tough, I got to say, to keep up. But the nice thing is Windows 10, the architecture isn't like going from like 98 to 2000 to Windows 7 and everything else. It's pretty consistent, so we're able to do little changes to stay up to date with it. But one big change that happened this year, actually, though, that we added was virtualization-based security. This is a big deal. It's a big deal because it's becoming a standard for NIST. It's already in the NIST standardization. Other corporations, they generally look to NIST to decide what they're going to do from a corporate governance perspective. So they would look at, oh, we have this requirement, the government uses it, all the three-letter agencies use it, we should use it too. And one of those requirements is now for virtualization-based security to be enabled. So this is Microsoft Device Guard and Microsoft Credential Guard. These are pretty interesting technologies. And what they do is you're actually not running Windows in a VM anymore. You're running Hyper-V now. So we have support for this to be able to run it in a guest. And the reason this is important is because A, it's going to be a matter of compliance at some point. The second reason is applications. For you guys, this is where you're going to want to explore this, because applications going forward are going to have compatibility issues with this new technology. I know I had a recent conversation with our friends over at Dell, and they were rolling out VBS internally. And maybe I'm oversharing, but we had some applications break. They would go do things in the registry, generally custom applications. They would do things at some of the lower levels of the Windows system. And now, in this virtualization-based security world, Device Guard, Credential Guard enabled, there's a trap in between the hypervisor and the OS. And it's catching all the calls, and it's saying, no, this one's not allowed, that one's not allowed, this one okay, this one okay, that one no. So it's important for you guys, you're going to need to test your applications in this new world. So it's really great that because they have that standardized platform, that we've got all that in Workstation Pro as well, and of course, more than that. You guys already know what Workstation does, all that good stuff, and more. What we did this year with Workstation was, of course, hardware version 14, Windows 10 update, VBS support as a guest, so you guys can create those virtual machines using VBS. Now, I will say, too, one thing we don't have, which you do not see on this list, and I'll be open about it, we don't have VBS as a host right now. The reason for that, I mentioned earlier, so like if you have a VBS-enabled computer and you want to run Workstation on it, that straight up will not work. The reason is because I mentioned earlier, you're in this Hyper-V environment, and Hyper-V doesn't do nesting. So we are actually working with Microsoft pretty closely to address this. They've been very cooperative. There's no animosity. Everything's working really great. It's just a matter of timing until we get to that point. So what else did we do here? We added some pretty cool features around the networking. There's a few things in the UI that you'll notice, like you can open and explore to quickly get to the VMX file as opposed to having to go through and click around. And we have new support for all the latest new versions of what's the most recent one? Kaby Lake processors and beyond. And one thing that our users really asked for as well was being able to rename networks. So now no longer do you need to deal with like VMnet 1, VMnet 2, VMnet 3. You can rename those to whatever you want, so you can logically kind of keep your networks organized. With hardware version 14, we have another couple of cool things. Actually, before I get into that, on the network side, we have a network simulator as well this year. Some of these features are actually in there a few years ago, but I don't think they were really promoted properly. My predecessor, I'll blame. But we are actually able to introduce packet loss, latency, as well as set the bandwidth on the inbound and outbound interfaces for each VM, for each network card attached to that VM. It's a network card advanced property. So it's great. We actually use it internally when we're testing our Horizon View. So Horizon 7 client, we will install that in a virtual machine, we'll introduce packet loss, and then we'll test to see how our new protocols are handling degraded networks. So it's really great for you guys as well to kind of benefit by testing your applications over in less than ideal situations, and you can configure that. With hardware version 14, we also have a bunch of new actual devices, virtual devices. Some of them are required for VBS security, right? So there's IOMMU, there's an Intel DirectPath I/O technology that got enabled that is really only enabled for this specific use case. But one feature that we have with the hardware platform is a brand new virtual trusted platform module. So what this is this allows us to have a secret encrypted cryptographic enclave, if you will, within the VM that allows you to enable things like BitLocker inside of your guest. So one of the requirements to turn that on is actually you need to encrypt the VM itself. And then what we do is, so the VM is encrypted, we then add the TPM, and then we go in and we turn on BitLocker. What it does is the TPM actually creates the key and stores that key. So you don't need to worry about what the BitLocker key is, you just need to worry about what the encryption password on the VM itself is. So it's really great. You can hand it around. It can be made portable as long as someone has the password, they can get up and run it. And that's another great way to make sure that we're compliant if like BitLocker becomes a compliance thing. And we also have like a virtual non-volatile memoried or PCIe device, which is kind of cool. It's good for doing vSAN. So you can put that SSD, virtual SSD basically, onto your VM, and it makes it really easy to go ahead and test out things like vSAN. And there's a bit of a performance gain sort of with it, but there's compatibility, so it's use at your own kind of discretion. It's not something that we put by default, but by all means, play around. So one thing I mentioned is or actually I didn't mention, is we have a pretty cool vCenter server deployment. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you that actually right now. So this year we decided to, actually here, hold on. Yeah. Bring it up. I'm going to do demos kind of mid through the presentation rather than just hold them all off at the end. I kind of want to just make sure you're seeing it as I'm talking about it, sort of thing. So with the vCenter server appliance, we actually have a new UI that allows us to import that OVA file and basically do all the right things as far as supporting the credentials that are involved and all the other configuration options. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. So we've got Workstation up here. You can just go File, and I'm going to say Open. And I've got my vCenter server appliance here. so we can select it. Am I not sharing? Oh, I pushed the button. Help me out here. I'm on 5. I was pushing 5. It's blinking. Come on, there we go. I hit the wrong button, not bad. All right, so anyway, here's Workstation. We can go File, and we can go Open, and it's very simple. We have our vCenter server appliance. I've got 5.5 there, or 6.5 rather. And when we go to import it, these are actually now all options within the appliance itself. So this is actually the EULA that's written in the appliance, and we accept. We can give a name for the VM, and we have a storage path, of course. And now we get some pretty interesting configuration options. So we can say, hey, how big do I want this to be? And do I want to have the platform services controller embedded in that? Or do I want to use this as actually a dedicated platform services controller? You can actually install it just as that. So there's a lot of options there. So we're just going to pick the tiny one because, goodness, that needs a lot of juice to run. So each option tells you roughly what is required. So we've got 2 CPUs and 10 gigs of memory required for this. And as you go up, you can see, these things start to grow pretty heavily. Like extra large needs 24 CPUs and 48 gigs of RAM, which I don't think this little laptop is going to be able to provide today. Going forward, we've got all the configuration options. Now, typically, you'd have to either go and manually edit these things in the command, or I should say in the configuration files themselves, but now we basically just show them all here for you. So you can very quickly and easily see the different options that you've got here, configure your networking. If there's any SSO involved, you can automatically plug that into your directory, as well as set the root password. If you want to enable CEIP, we actually disable this. This is our phone home analytic technology. And of course, any other networking properties that you have. So when we click import, it's going to go ahead and do the thing. I'm going to cancel that because it's going to take bloody forever. And just for the record, too, I guess I should show you. So that's it in Workstation. But the cool thing is, Fusion's got the same thing. I like to do these things in nested environments, because why not? But Fusion actually can also do the exact same thing. We can go import, and we will pick our VCSA. We get that same EULA. And we've got a nice little UI here that tells you kind of how many steps that you can expect out of this. So we accept the EULA. We have, again, those same options to be able to configure which of the sizes that you'd like, all of the same configuration options here as far as networking, SSO, et cetera. And if we continue, it's going to go ahead and want to do the import. So we won't bother going through that. And I'll take Workstation here, and we'll just suspend that. So let's get back to it. So I mentioned we had Device Guard, Credential Guard. This is a pretty cool service, pretty cool feature. It matters a lot for compliance. It's one of those things that it's not very cool. It's a boring feature that you turn on. There's nothing you really get to see. But what we're going to show you is exactly kind of what that looks like when we turn it on and whatnot. So Zongmin, why don't you come on up and give Zongmin a hand. He's going to go ahead and do a VCSA, or I should say a VDS demo for us.
Thank you, Mike.
So he's going to drive. I will do some commentary on the side here. So what are we doing now?
So for VBS support, actually, there are 2 sides. We need 2 sides of things we need to do. Firstly, from the workstation side, and secondly, from the guest operating system side. And for workstation side, we are doing this by just a few clicks from the UI.
Awesome. So do we do that before installing or after installing? Where do we do that?
I'm going to demo this from scratch by creating a new Windows 10 VM.
OK. Oh, geez, again. There we go.
OK.
Ta-da.
OK. So VBS relies on UEFI and secure boot. And for UEI and secure boot, that's actually on the custom configuration.
So one thing we added this year, in addition to UEFI support, was UEFI secure boot support. So that is a requirement for this technology.
OK. And we use default. And here at the firmware type dialog, make sure UEFI is checked, and also we can either check secure boot here or at a later phase.
So we can either, during the installation, we can pick it, or afterward, we can just, when we want to turn it on, if we've already got an image, you can just go ahead and turn the option on. And when we turn it on, he'll show you how it kind of cascades other components.
Yes. So I'm going to use default for the rest of the settings. Yep. Okay. Then we will need to enable VBS from UI, and we can do this either before the VM installation or after the VM got installed. And so we check the virtual machine setting, and under Advanced tab, you check Enable VBS.
So you can see that we've got actually the firmware type already selected. If you deselect that,
yes.
Uncheck that option you got right there.
Right.
And now uncheck the secure boot.
Mm-hmm.
Now go ahead and check VBS again.
Yes.
So by default, what we were actually doing is we define the requirements for this feature. So one of those is secure boot. So as soon as you turn that on, it automatically adds that hardware to the device.
Yeah, and by checking Enable VBS, we are actually enabling several things by default. UEFI, secure boot, enable Intel VTX EPT, and IOMMU. And click.
Question? Yes, it would configure, so it would basically add new hardware. Well, the VM has to be powered off to do it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, you either have a VM that you've created, and then afterward you go into the settings and turn this on. And what it does is it enables all the software or the hardware requirements that VBS needs. And then you go into Windows, and then we turn it on from there. And if you try to go in and turn it on in Windows before that, it doesn't have the right components, so it can't turn itself on, right?
Okay. Okay. To save the time, I already have our VBS VM that is configured from both Workstation and guest OS level. So I'm going to boot it up.
This is the part where the demo goes all bad.
Yep. And
so you can see the VMware logo on there. That's because of the new UEFI. We're able to inject a logo into that, yep, unlike old school BIOS.
And for this VM, I also have TPM configured. So, and I also enabled BitLocker. So you can see that when the VM boots, it doesn't ask me to input the encryption key for the disk. Okay. So now I'm in the guest operating system. So how to check VBS is enabled or not? So you know that VBS is actually rely on Hyper-V. So firstly, we need to check Hyper-V is enabled for this VM. So within guest, that's all Microsoft thing.
And you'd think it would be under system and security.
So.
But
here,
it's not.
Here on the control panel, programs, you can see Hyper-V hypervisor is checked. So that's the first step. And secondly, we need to check from group policy. To make sure VBS enabled there. So we go to group policy, computer configuration, administrative templates system, and here we have device guard. And within device guard, you can see there is a turn on virtualization-based security, and now it's enabled. And we click to check the details. So it's enabled. And we also have a simple PowerShell command line to check the output to make sure VBS is enabled or not. Working. Copy it. So why it's not working? Control C. Yeah. So when we get output value as 2, we know that virtualization-based security is actually enabled. So
Totally intuitive, right? 2. Oh, that means it's on.
yeah. Yes, and here we can also see that BitLocker is enabled.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's very easy, right? Just a few clicks, then VBS is enabled. But actually, that's huge development work, engineering work, especially from our platform team.
Oh yeah, it's been over a year they've been working on this, so it's been a ton of work getting to this point.
Yep.
So I mean, thanks so much. That was a great demo. Appreciate it. Guys, give me a hand.
Thank you.
And let's see, did I push the right button this time? All right. Okay, so that's Workstation. Let's look at my favorite toy, Fusion. I am a Mac guy. I came from Apple before I came to VMware, so it's near and dear to my heart. The reason I got a Mac computer in the first place was when I used to live in Toronto. I am Canadian, no do to boot it. And when I lived in Toronto, I used to be a system administrator for a very small data center. Everything we did was open source, so we had our core router was PF running on OpenBSD. All of our networking stuff was using Cacti with Nagios and all these other really cool open source technologies. So for me, what I needed was a system that had a real command line. Like I needed Bash, and I didn't want to have to futz around with a Linux laptop trying to convert a Dell over to a Linux machine, which is not a big deal. But for me, because Linux is it moves so much, it's nicer to have it in a virtual machine and have something a little more stable in my host that's still POSIX. So that's why I went with Fusion, and that's why I went with the Mac. And the fact that we have Fusion on here is fantastic because it really allows us to just do the same thing that we do in Workstation, where it doesn't matter what platform you have, it doesn't matter what operating system you have, you're going to be able to use all the tools that you need to use them for whatever you need to use. So this year, version 10, 10th anniversary, we do as well have the same hardware version 14. So we've got our fall creators update support, which also includes server 2016 updates. Mac OS 10.13 host and guest support, which is pretty nice for High Sierra there. So Apple or Microsoft VBS support. It's less of a thing for Fusion to do it, but we didn't want to turn it off and restrict that to Fusion Pro. So we enabled it for this use case as well. One thing that we do on Fusion that's a little different than on Workstation is we have a host renderer that traditionally had to be OpenGL. There's no DirectX on a Mac host, so we had to do something in order to translate our guest 3D acceleration graphics calls to something on the host. And being at OpenGL, we were kind of stuck at DirectX 10. And the reason for that is there aren't corresponding calls that exist in DirectX 11 and DirectX 12 to bring those back over to OpenGL. So what we did this year was we adopted Metal as our renderer of choice. And what this has done for us is it's given us more performance, better rendering. It's better on battery life too, because Apple works really closely with the graphics drivers to make sure that it's optimized for their hardware. We did a lot on the UI as well, a ton. The whole new UI is very different. You'll see in a couple screenshots here and when I get into the demo as well. You also added touch bar support, which is pretty nice. If you've got one of the newer Macs, you can quickly just, on the VM library window, toggle back and forth between VMs, or in a VM window itself, you can toggle the view modes, as well as a couple of other quick things. And we also, made some cleanup stuff around the new VM wizard, and the same thing with the OVA support, like I was showing you that off. That also works in Fusion as well as Fusion Pro. It's less, you wouldn't want to do it really in Fusion because you could, but then you don't really have all the same networking controls that you need in order to have an actual vSphere lab. So here's a quick look at some of the stuff in the UI. One of the things that I'm actually most excited about, because I'm a big nerd, is this right here. Being able to specify a direct resolution. It really makes taking screenshots super easy. And I think this was a highly requested feature as well, which is like having the IP address in the interface that you can copy and paste from. Woo. I know, right? It's such a big deal. So yeah. So let's look at Metal. Metal's pretty cool. It's what I'm going to do is a very quick demo here. If I push the right button this time, maybe. Get up my right VM. I know I'm not supposed to be showing yet. There we go. Okay. Please do not crash. And the reason I say please do not crash is because I am actually launching a game in the middle of the screen. So it should just work, or it should crash. Hey, look at that, it works. Sweet. So what I like to do is run a little benchmark here. So this is actually Batman Arkham Origins running DirectX 10. It's a fun game if you haven't played it. But it's actually leveraging our Metal host renderer. I was going to do a bit of a demo whereby I would show on Fusion 8, here's what the demo looks, or here's what it looks like, and then on Fusion 10, here's what it looks like. But it was just too cumbersome to kind of try and work with that. So here it is rendering in Metal right now. Take a look at the frame rate there. 75 frames a second. That's more than your eyes can see. So we're very excited about that. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I like Batman. So yeah, this one's actually even a little bit more complicated, but yeah, and this is running at whatever resolution on the display is. If you run that, actually, when I was doing my demos, I ran it at like 1080p with anti-aliasing turned on and a whole bunch of other stuff, and I'm still hitting around 30, 35 frames a second on it. So as far as gaming goes, it's something that is except when it does things like that, it runs nice and smooth, and we're very happy about it. So we showed you the demo. And we've done some early benchmarking that basically shows across the board performance improvements. There are a couple of areas that you can see where we don't fare as well as our older technology did. But Crisis Warhead, for example, I don't know how many folks are playing Crisis in a VM, but we're going to work on that. Those are bugs as far as we're concerned. Let me just suspend this thing actually while I'm here. So that's Fusion Standard. Let's go ahead and look at Fusion Pro. Fusion Pro. On screen there, what you're looking at is the output of our API. It's a brand new feature that we added this year. It's probably the feature that I'm most excited about this entire release. And the reason I'm excited about it is because it opens the door for new integrations. It's one thing to be running a virtual machine, right? That's fine. But if you look at what things like VirtualBox does right now, they have a pretty good API, or at least an API, that third parties integrate with. So is anybody here familiar with Vagrant? You guys have probably heard of Docker, right? So right now, Vagrant and Docker have plugins that work with with Fusion on using our older technology, which is VMrun. What we've done is we've added an API that is fully REST-based. It's built using Swagger, which if you're familiar with Swagger, it's kind of a framework. They're moving into something called Open API now. So the idea is it's a standardized framework. And it gives us a lot of benefit from familiarity. It goes back and forth with standard JavaScript object notation, so it's your typical JSON files, and it really allows folks to start integrating Fusion into workflows. So we have kind of two scenarios on that I'll get to in a minute. Other stuff that we added from for Fusion Pro was vSphere host power operations. We added this to Workstation as well, which is if you connect to a vCenter server or directly to an ESXi machine, you can actually now control power. So you can turn them on, turn them off, or I should say turn them off, reboot them, or put them in or out of maintenance mode. So just one more reason to not have to open up our favorite vSphere web client. I didn't build it. So we also added the same thing for network renaming, being able to modify those networks, as well as the network simulation, test your applications under degraded networking. And we also, in the case of Fusion, it was lacking in Workstation as far as being able to configure port forwarding rules. So now we've got UI to be able to manage that network full on end to end. And if there's anything we're missing, please let us know. So we got VBS as well. We've already shown you that. That's exciting. This is what our vSphere support looks like. It's a lot of work goes into a little button. It's funny. Same thing with VBS. You put a year's worth of engineering in for that one checkbox. But so here's a look at that. And I already showed you guys. I walked through it. So here's the vCenter server deploy. And this is what our virtual networking now looks like. So you can see here we have the ability to manage and control ports on the host port and map that to the VM IP and port. Which now, if you don't know the VM IP, you can very easily get that from the library window. We also did that for Workstation, by the way, too. So if you're in the Workstation UI now, the IP address is there, too, so you can copy it. Just we didn't forget about it. And then, of course, on the Fusion side, we have the network simulator here. So per NIC, inbound and outbound, you can control the specific bandwidth. So in this case, we have like the cable modem, so you can say it's 10 meg up, 4 meg, or 10 meg down, 4 meg up. And the same thing with packet loss and latency there. So the API, I'm going to talk about that now. So I mentioned it's REST-based. It's over HTTPS. If you're using it on a local host, it just bounces back to HTTP, so you can kind of do it if you're a lone developer who's kind of using Vagrant, Docker, and other stuff like Ansible and whatnot. You can actually do that without having to have SSL certificates created. However, as soon as you configure this to listen on a port other than localhost, it's going to actually require that you have a certificate. So you have to go through the process of creating a certificate and making it valid. And then when you start the process, you just specify, here's the key, here's the certificate. So it's very secure. It's not a thing that we wanted to just let out there that anybody can go in and just like, oh, look, delete VM. Boop. It's probably bad. So it's really, like I said, designed for automation. It can be used locally or remotely. And there's the Swagger UI with some pretty cool examples. So let's look at that. Okay, so what I'm going to do actually, I'm going to quit Fusion. So the nice thing is about this is you actually don't need to have Fusion running to do it. So this is basically now letting VMware Fusion and VMware Fusion run headless, basically. So we'll start the daemon. VM REST. So it says I need a credential. So by default, I have to give it a username. And it's going to ask me for that username. So my username is going to be Fusion. And we have a strict password requirement. So I have to be 8 characters, upper, lower, number, symbol, yeah. The joys. All right, so we've updated it. So now I can just run VM REST, and now the server is running. So if I go and bring up Safari, let's see. And we run by default on port 8697, which you can configure and sped on whatever other default port you like. So we have the ability to control host networks. So you can ask about what networks are there. You can modify and update port forwarding rules. We can destroy port forwarding rules. We can actually even put the service itself in and out of maintenance. This is really just like an operation administrative sort of a task, so you don't have to quit the daemon, but you might not want to have it communicating with the VMware processes. For VMs, you can get a list of all the VMs, return all information about that particular VM. We can update a VM, so give it new RAM, new options, whatever. Basically, everything you can, just about everything you can do in the UI, we're going to be able to do here, with a full description of how it works. So here's kind of like the JSON example value. If we look at what the model looks like, the developers that really want to understand kind of how the blocks fit together, that's there for them. And we can actually run it right here. So if I just say try it out, it gives me a command, and it gives me what the curl command would be, and then the URL and our response. So you can see authentication failed. Authentication failed because I didn't authorize this client. So if we do that, okay. So now we're here, and if we try it out now, we're going to see a bit of a different result. So we can see the curl header has changed. So we now have this authorization string, which is basically currently we have a type of authorization which is called basic, and that basic authorization is a hash based off of the username and password that we put there that it sends over the wire to authenticate. So in the response body, you can see I've got all of my VMs and various settings on them, or I should say various IDs. So let me find my one VM that I wanted to mess with. 1704. Is that it? Yeah. So we look, I got a VM here and 1704. So what I can do is I could say, hey, what is this VM? Sure. So hey, VM, if I put in your ID here, what are you going to tell me? So it's going to query the service on the back end and say, hey, this VM has 1 processor and a gig of RAM. And I'm curious, actually, I can't remember if this is powered or not. So let's find out. So if I pop that in there and run this, and it also shows you kind of like if things go wrong, what the examples would be. So you get a 400, you got an invalid parameter, authentication might have failed, permission denied, etc. So we're very verbose about what you can expect. So currently this VM is suspended. So what I can do then is I can go ahead and actually resume it. So if I put ID VM, let's see, operation resume. So you see I have my options here, on, off, shut down, suspend, on, pause. So let's just say on, actually not resume. And if we run the command, it should just return with a successful value. And actually, while that's going, if we just look at activity monitor, we can now see that we have a VMX process here running. And there's no UI. So this is just running. So now if I actually fire up Fusion, I got that VM right there. It was running the whole time. So that, my friends, is our API. I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's very interesting. It opens up a new door, right? It allows us to interoperate with other processes. It allows workflows to say, hey, spin up that VM, make it do this, and then when it's done, destroy it. You know, it's really designed for this new agile workflow, this new agile model. So when I was saying earlier, you know, we've got two kind of ways that we think about it. On one end, we think about it in the terms of the developer who's doing kind of what I just described and what I showed. The other side of the house is operations. We have a very big customer who I guarantee you all know, I'm not allowed to say. They make some pretty great software for painting things on digital formats. They are a heavy user of Fusion. They use it in their testing environment. What they're actually doing with this API is they're delivering Mac OS as a service. So they have a bunch of Mac Pros running in the data center, or iMacs, or whatever they need, running in a data center. And they built a custom workflow to request Mac OS virtual machines for developers who don't have them, or testing environments who don't have them. So an end user can go, okay, click button, Mac OS comes up, it calls the API. The API gets after administrator says, yeah, okay, go ahead. The API would then call Fusion, fire up a VM, ask it for its IP address, deliver all of that back to the end user, and the end user gets an IP address that they now go screen share, open, and now they're inside of a Mac environment that they can do all their testing that they needed to do, which is a pretty awesome thing. When he came and told me he's trying to do this, I'm like, dude, I have a thing for you. Because he was trying to do it with VM Run. The old way of doing it. It's like, let me make this easier for you. And so they've been running with it for a little while, and they're very happy with it. So we're very excited to kind of see that being able to deliver these things as a service through API and program automation. So that's our presentation for today. I do always like to do one more thing, because that's how I roll, because I miss Steve. So you might have seen, if you guys saw any of the other sessions, we've got this really cool box. We used to actually sell Fusion and Workstation in a physical store. You could go to Fry's and buy a copy off the shelf, and you can go to an Apple store and buy a copy off the shelf. It was amazing. But who does that anymore? Nobody. What we wanted to do was, because it's our 10th anniversary, we wanted to give you guys something special. So we've got a whole bunch of them that are available actually in the store over by the hang space, the VM Village there. They are for sale for $99, and inside of this box, which is a metal box, we have this really awesome collectible coaster. It's heavy. It can hurt somebody. As well as a little USB stick with copies of Fusion 10, Workstation 14 for Windows, and Workstation 14 for Linux, which are not yet released for you guys. I'm going to give everybody in this room one of these boxes.